Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 134. And my guest in this episode is Dr. Jenny Powers, and Jenny is a mom, a writer, and a scientist, as well as an athlete from Colorado. And she had gotten a BS in chemical engineering from the University of Colorado Boulder, and then she went on to get a Ph.D. in Immunology and Microbiology from University of Colorado Denver. And in this conversation, we discuss a book that she co-wrote called On the Origin of Being. And these are my words. In having read the book, this is a way of lensing our lives now, using a sort of template of our evolutionary history to see where we can find opportunities to learn from the narrative of our history. And by narrative, I mean our behaviors and how we interacted with the environment. And the book aims to help us to seek a kind of eudaimonic happiness, if you will, in modern living. Despite all the trappings of modern living, we can see through either diet or lifestyle or behavior how we can learn from our ancestors. So it was a great book. I really appreciated Jenny's company in this conversation, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. And thank you so much for being here. I'd like to welcome Dr. Jenny Powers to the IdeaCast interview series. We are, in this episode, going to talk about a book that Jenny had recently co-written and published, and I'll save the surprise. I'll let her introduce that, but also welcome to the YouTube audience. Glad to have you here, and Spotify folks as well. Jenny, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Justin. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I am too, and I have been looking forward to it because I read your book, and it's a book for the ages, book for, as it were, and a book that I think has some value and importance culturally and food for thought, so to speak, because you discuss food in the book. So,
right.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you feel that way about that. I think whether or not people read the book, I think just the messages that we have in the book are so universal, and there's so many people who need to hear them right now, because there's just a lot of, people are struggling with their health and need to know that there's another way.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the book is called On the Origin of Being. And there's a sub. There you go. Show us the book. Awesome. And I will have links down in the description field, or show notes, as some people call it, to both Spotify and YouTube audience. And you guys can find and discover not only the book, but more info on Jenny's writing partner, Luke Comer. Is that his name?
Yep. I'll talk about him. Yeah.
Good. Okay, great. Yeah. Before we get started on the book, though, I think it would be great to get the audience acquainted with you. If you want to share any background information on what you did academically, which I think is really neat and fascinating, and I think there's overlap with the interest and the thesis of the book. So if you want to start with that, and then we'll start talking about the book.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I went to the University of Colorado and I got a degree in chemical engineering. And I also played intercollegiate basketball, which was an experience unto itself. And then I worked as an engineer for a couple years, but I was working at a company. It was a heart-lung bypass company. They were making heart-lung bypass machines and blood oxygenators, and they sent all the engineers, to an open heart surgery. So I got to go into the operating room.
Wow.
For a quadruple bypass surgery. And I'm like, I am in the wrong profession. I wanted to get there. It was so fascinating. And so I wanted to, I'm like, I think I'm going to kind of change a little bit and head towards more biological sciences. And so I took a few prerequisite classes and things like that. And I fell in love with immunology, which is the study of the immune system. And so I came to the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center and got my PhD in immunology. And what I loved about immunology, my specialty, people who do PhDs really zoom in close. So, everyone kind of knows what the immune system is, but we were trying to figure out how signals from outside cells get inside the cell. So it's called cell signaling. And there's all these really complicated ways that cells can, there's external, cytokines or something, and there's receptors on the cells. And then once the cytokine binds to the receptor, all of these things happen inside the cell. and then the cell decides what it needs to do based on the signals. So
Mm-hmm.
I worked specifically on the innate immune system, which is kind of the system that is in place before your adaptive immune system kicks in. So it's like the macrophages and neutrophils. They're not necessarily specific for the bacteria or virus or infection. They're just like, they just go in and start doing stuff and start calling in, the cavalry.
Okay.
And then the adaptive immune system kicks in, a few days later. And those are T cells and B cells. So I focused on innate immunity and macrophages in particular. Macrophages are the ones that come in and they like engulf things and kill them.
Okay.
But what was really cool about this cell signaling is there's this inflammatory cytokine called TNF alpha that when it binds to the receptor on a macrophage, it has two completely different signaling pathways. One, it causes the cell to proliferate and become activated. And two, it causes the cell to undergo programmed cell death. And so these are very vastly different outcomes for the same signal. So my thesis was trying to figure out what is different inside the cell to make it go one direction or the other. So that's a very long-winded, very focused in conversation. But it was fascinating to learn about that stuff. And then I did a postdoc at National Jewish Health, which is a famous respiratory hospital, and I looked into rheumatoid arthritis-associated lung diseases. It's a fibrotic lung disease that not everybody with rheumatoid arthritis gets, but some people do. And so we're trying to figure out what's different about these people who get this fibrotic lung disease versus those who don't. So so as much as I loved learning about the human body and just how miraculous it was, and what was amazing is how we could tease out these little things that are happening in these tiny cells, all the different kinds of assays that we could do and all the different experiments and the tools that we had were just so amazing. Our lab made some knockout mice, which is a crazy thing. You make a whole organism that doesn't have a gene expressed in it. But I wasn't very happy. I was kind of depressed. I've always kind of been a perfectionist. And I think my worth started becoming really tied into my achievements. And I think I had kind of all along really deep down wanted to become a writer. It just didn't seem very practical, I guess, or it didn't seem as important as getting a PhD or being an engineer or whatever. And so I left academia, which was a really, really hard decision to make, but it was probably a really good one for me. I wanted to kind of have more time to spend with my kids that, I was pregnant at the time, with my first kid. And I'm like, you know what? I am going to shift gears and start writing, start really playing into, or just, you can't just all of a sudden start and then publish. There's just lots of stuff you have to kind of learn about yourself. And there's lots of stuff you have to learn about the craft of writing and things like that. And I was actually writing fiction. I have lots of fiction stories and I have a couple of fiction manuscripts. And so it was kind of this kind of sideways shift into something completely different.
Yeah.
But as you know, most writers don't get paid very much, especially when they're not published. So I was looking for something to do that would help pay the bills. And I came across this ad from Luke Comer, my co-author, who was interested in hiring somebody to research and write a book that he had been kicking around for a really long time. And when he and I were on our first call, kind of my interview, we really hit it off. And all the stuff that he was saying, it was like light bulbs are going off. So Luke's kind of area of emphasis in his adult life has been nutrition and why the modern world is not providing our bodies with the nutrition it needs. So he took this deep dive into, the evolution of nutrition, the evolution of our physiology, as our nutrition changed. And because he's actually wanting to find kind of what is the ultimate meal? What he actually is starting a food company based on his
Oh,
research about
okay.
called Sapient Stews, which is pretty cool. The food is really good. I've tried it.
Okay.
But while he was doing all this research for kind of this nutrition, he realized that there are so many other ways that we are mismatched. Our biology and our environment are mismatched. And he didn't, he had this kind of vision for this book that investigated all these different ways that we were not living in accord with our biology, and kind of using this same kind of deep dive approach, like look at our evolutionary history as to why certain traits, why certain behaviors evolved. And then once, those behaviors became really important when we were hunter-gatherers, because we lived as hunter-gatherers for 99% of our existence. And so a lot of these behaviors and traits were very adaptive and very good for our survival as hunter-gatherers. But then the world changed, and it changed quite rapidly. And so not only have our behaviors started changing, because the environment, we started moving to cities. We went indoors. We got our food. We no longer were part of the food, gathering or hunting our food, And then so that was after the agricultural revolution, and then also the industrial revolution even got more and more. More people were moving from urban areas or rural areas to urban areas, and our behaviors changed. So we were no longer, exhibiting behaviors that we did in our evolutionary journey. And our bodies reacted to the fact that we weren't behaving in a way or giving our bodies what they actually needed to thrive. And so what we're seeing now in lots of different areas of human life, people, like I was alluding to earlier, people aren't necessarily happy or healthy. They're kind of more sickly. We're not thriving, Like the object of evolution isn't to be happy, but the object of evolution is to have an organism that thrives in the environment that it is in. And so the more he talked about that, I was like, oh my gosh, yes. This is why I've just struggled with my mental health. This is why I've struggled with my physical health. All of these things. It's not because there's something wrong with me, or I have a moral failing, or I'm not good enough. It's that my body is not being taken care of in this modern environment. And so it kind of like opened my eyes to a whole bunch of things, like, oh, well, now that I know, and now that I've done all this research to figure out, like, okay, well, how did we used to do it? Like, now it's my responsibility to change. It wasn't my fault that I was struggling. I think people blame themselves a lot for a lot of things. But it's really hard when we live in a society and everyone's swimming the same direction, and it's this fast current, and you're just going along for the ride and you're miserable. But you're like, oh, but there's a different way. And it's hard to kind of turn around and swim against the current. But I feel like there's more and more people who are getting to the point where they're like, there has to be another way. I need to live a different way. And so it's sort of, I think right now, the last 20 years, last 5 years even, the fact that our health is failing, that we might still live. Actually, I mean, our lifespans are decreasing a little bit, but we might still live to 75. But how many of those last 20 years are healthy, are happy, are thriving? And how many of those are with chronic illnesses and hospital stays and medication after medication after medication just to stay alive? So I was totally on board with this project, and kind of started, the outline was to have 10 different ways of being. And so I actually have written the 10, all 10 chapters. Well, they're parts now. But then our publisher was like, well, this is really long. Why don't you break it into 3 books? And so On the Origin of Being is the first book, where we talk about kind of more our basic needs, sleep, nutrition, work and rest, and our relationship with nature.
Mm-hmm.
And then the one I'm working on now that hopefully will come out at the end of this year has more of our social needs, social groups, child rearing, the sexes. And then the third book, which will hopefully come out a year from, like late 2026. That just sounds crazy. It'll have more of our cultural needs, like rituals and the arts and spirituality and religion and things like that. So On the Origin of Being, the first book kind of sets the foundation. It kind of helps people see what our methodology is. We take behaviors sometimes from the very beginning of life, and we teach people how these changed and evolved as we evolved.
Mm-hmm.
And then we spend a lot of time talking about how our hunter-gatherer ancestors lived. And then usually, hopefully, by the time people get to the section on modern humans, they already know how it went wrong and what we're not doing. And then we try to give, simple, one step at a time kind of action items at the end of every section, just to be like, okay, we're not going to go back and live as hunter-gatherers, as romantic as that seems. The modern world isn't all doom and gloom. The modern world is pretty great. But if we can bring some of the behaviors of our ancestors into the modern world and incorporate them, then we get the best of both worlds. And we can actually provide our inner hunter-gatherer, because our genes are pretty much very, very similar to hunter-gatherers, give our bodies what they need. So we have best of both worlds.
Yeah, I think in your book there was an illustration that speaks to the three volumes that you're publishing.
That's
there
correct,
was
yes.
So that's great. That anchors that for me anyway, having read the book.
Kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Our
hierarchy. But what's really interesting is what I'm finding out. Like, I'm working on the second chapter about social groups. And what's interesting is that, how Maslow's hierarchy of needs is like, this needs to be fulfilled, and then this needs to be fulfilled, and this needs to be fulfilled. And it's, it's linear, and it's hierarchical, and it's individual. And what I'm finding is that he actually visited and stayed with some Blackfoot tribe. And it totally changed his opinion about what was going on, because indigenous people are self-actualized already. They're already, they don't have to get those steps. And so the self-actualization is there, but then also how they stay there is all of these things are interconnected, and all of these things are supported by the group. So that becomes really, really important in the second book that I'm working on. And I might actually change that pyramid to be more of a circle, because I think that reflects more, you can have self-esteem, without having, there's different things that you can have based on, if you're not doing it alone, you're supported in all of these different ways at once. It's not like you have to be supported here and then here and you're building up if you're supported all around. So I just thought that was an interesting, I'm sort of like thinking, I think I might have to change our model a little bit. So.
Yeah. And it could be a very interesting geometric shape, because, if you inject systems complexity into the stages and the complexity of these phenotypical creatures, psychically phenotypical, sandbag, and culturally too. So there's culture and individuals. So it could get dimensional very quickly.
It's very dimensional. And I think since COVID, I think COVID really revealed the state of our social connections, or lack thereof. And so I think now more than ever, people are looking at, like, why are we so lonely? It's because, that social piece, which I have kind of in the middle of this pyramid, is as important as sleep and food. Like, we are social creatures. We need that interaction for our health. And so, I'm kind of rethinking, like, okay, we have to have our basic needs met first, and then we can have our social needs. I'm like, no, we have to have our social needs met so we can have our basic needs met. Because, our history before modern times is we are cooperative. We work and live in groups, somewhat free of hierarchy, a little more egalitarian.
Right.
And so like, I actually think this was probably going to be the easiest book to write and to think about and to synthesize. Because, social groups and child rearing, things just get more and more complex, especially in the absence of community.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you point out in this first book that, as you just said, we are social creatures. And you said also that, one of the things that is working to our disadvantage nutritionally is that we are in this stigmergic kinetic energy of, industrial farming and the supply available and cost and all these considerations that could stymie our best intentions to move into a space nutritionally that would benefit us more. And that, for better and for worse, I think is a reality for us, especially as we connect more and more, especially in 30, 40 years, we've been technologically connected through the internet and social media and things like that. Right. So yeah, I always try to use that metaphor of, like you were saying, swimming in the stream together, that stigmergy that goes on, or murmuration, or however you want to phrase that. One of my takeaways, or one of the thoughts that kept resonating with me when I was reading the book, and this could get strange, but there's well, I'm strange, yeah. So that is my thoughts. But you might appreciate this because there's a critique or a philosophical skepticism called anarcho-primitivism, and people love to beat it up, straw man it, and dismiss it. But what I was taking away, as you said a moment ago, that everything you presented in the book offers these little kernels for us to, again, impart into our modern status, our modern machinations and phenomenology and all these things that we do as a culture at large. But the idea of anarcho-primitivism is to go back and examine what primitive cultures of, human primitive cultures, what benefited them and what were the saleable assets, if you will, of what they were doing at every epoch, every period, even sort of post settling and sedentary and pastoral and agriculture into, the development of urbanization and aggregation into city cultures that, at those earlier stages, what was working, what was going on. And then, like you said, with the Industrial Revolution, we have a lot of great things working, but we're paying these Malachian prices, or debts or whatever for all those things. So just to offer that as one light bulb that went off for me is that this book offers what I would consider to be a very good, healthy, anarcho-primitivist implicit take on how do we extract out of our history that which worked for us, or that could benefit us in modern times. So I know it was a weird little tangent, but
but I think you have a really good point too, though, is that we can't live like hunter-gatherers, and there's going to be a lot of ways that they used to do things that we're not set up to do in the modern world. So we're going to have to figure out the modern way to meet those needs, right? I think it's sometimes going to be hard to be like, some of them are easy, like, get, bright light in the morning and decrease blue light at night to help you sleep. I mean, that's easy, but like some of these more complex, child rearing, I know this isn't part of the book, but this book, but like, we used to have this built-in, it literally takes a village, and men and women worked away from the home and relied on their entire band to take care of their children, to provide food, provide, just sensory and, information, provide learning. But our modern society is not set up for that. So the next challenge, I think, and there are a lot of people thinking about this, is how can we make it work in the modern world when we don't have these systems set up, or maybe we need to figure out how to set these systems up in order to have the support to make these little kernels of change. Because, if you don't have support for any change in your life, doesn't have to be necessarily, it can just be a habit. If you don't have support from that habit by another person or like an accountability buddy or someone like that, it's just not going to stick. So there needs to be, support, and people can find support in other people. And maybe from the kind of like, change is not going to come from the top down. We're going to have to build these things from the ground up, for sure.
Yeah. And one ray of light I saw years ago was in Japan, who are arguably a more collectivist culture, especially in various prefectures, that they integrated a elder care with daycare, with children, preschool daycare. And so they had two systems. Yeah, two systems. And you get this, as you were saying, what tribes do. Speaking back to my anarcho-primitivist thing, I love watching those programs where the scant few existing tribal cultures and communities in the Saharan region and the Amazonian region and in Micronesia, that they do what you were saying with the children, and it's a decentralized authority structure, and that, nobody is there are no Elon Musks or what is the guy Bezos, there's none of that going on in tribal structure, that everybody kind of shares the load. And you address that in the book too, which I appreciate. But that idea of integrating elder care with child care could be a simple solution here in the United States. Of course, everybody's going to have to shake out, can they make, profit at it, but to bring in,
yeah.
Right. I'm sorry, that was a jab. But
No. It's I laugh because it's unfortunately very true. But yeah, I do think it would sell, because I don't know when this happened, but when our culture got away from honoring elders to discarding them and not thinking that they had anything to say, because in a hunter-gatherer like society, the only way you can pass down information is through storytelling and talking. And the people who have lived the longest have the most stories, have the most education, have the most life experience. And that experience, those elders were critical. Passing that information down to the young ones was critical for survival. It was literally life and death. If the elders died without passing down their knowledge, that knowledge is lost forever.
Yeah.
And it could literally affect the life and death of the group. So, I love that idea. And every time I hear it, there's senior living centers and like Montessori preschools, and they're like being built together. And I just love that because, those kids are getting the benefit of those life experiences, and those, elders are feeling like they still have purpose. They have something to do. They're not just cast away. So, I think that's just so cool. And hopefully it's not just happening in Japan. I've seen it starting to happen here too.
Yeah. And I think it would, ensconce a kind of, generational, return to filial piety, which is the respect for the elder, and that it's not something you have to impose on a child, that they will have by experience. And the awe that they perhaps, in being around somebody who knows so many things and is a sage, that they can just do that automatically, and then they'll pass that to, we want to talk about adaptation and things like that when we abstract it away to a social ontology, that, what better way to impress upon the next generation. There's a group of people I follow on YouTube, and the channel's called Homo Mimeticus, right? So the mimetic aspect of how children learn. We wish to mime that which, we experience. So that's a rich environment when you bring those elders in there, to have them just export all of that, as you said, all the wisdom that they've accumulated. So yeah, that would be neat. That would be a wonderful way to see that proliferate in childcare. And wouldn't it perhaps, going back to this cold, hard, jaded kind of economic market system analysis, that if you have a population of elders or seniors, that maybe the cost of running it could be less, because then you have, obviously allowing for screening and things like that, but just allowing the elders to be stewards of the children during the day or whatever. And so you obviously have supervisors or professional care there to make sure everything's being well run. But yeah, it almost seems like it could pay for itself, because I'm sure the elders wouldn't sit there and demand, a contract that would, sort of give them, whatever money they seek. But yeah, anyway, there's got to be a neat formula in there somewhere that somebody really bright can figure out and chunk that out into scale it out into something that would benefit. And it would also hopefully tamp down this hyper individualism that we find ourselves here in the United States. We don't want pure collectivism. We don't want to get too hive mind, but we also don't want to be this, what Madison Avenue is always brainwashing us to do, which is to be that, Manifest
Rugged,
Destiny kind of.
rugged
Yeah,
individualism.
John Wayne and all. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, a little's good, but
we don't need anybody. But it's interesting. I was reading. I forgot I was reading. I think it was E.O. Wilson, or maybe it was another book. Anyway, people are like, well, I don't need anybody, but like, who made your clothes? Do you think about those people? Can you make your own clothes? So who harvested the cotton? Who, made the cotton into, material and thread, and then who sewed it? And for how much did they get paid to do that? Did you buy this from somebody who doesn't pay their workers very, very well, a sustainable wage? Are they working 12 hours a day? I mean, and then it got shipped to the US, and then it got put into the stores, and then the people are working in the stores. And so like, you think you're doing it all by yourself, but you're really not. And so I just thought that was such a cool way to put it. When we were hunter-gatherers, we knew all those people who were doing that, right?
Okay.
We knew exactly who killed the animal that we're eating that night and who prepared it, and how what they're telling stories about it, to teach the younger kids how they did it so they could go out and do it. That was all part of our community, the clothes making, all of the stuff. And now, like, people don't even think about where their steak comes from. The amount of food and water that this tiny little animal grew up and had to have all these resources. And then, all the people who, work in the meat houses and stuff. And let's not even get into the ethics and you know what I mean? But like, there are so many different steps that happen before you get this little packaged thing of meat that you're like, I bought this with my money. I can do it all by myself. Yeah. Well, could you actually do it all by yourself?
Go slaughter that animal yourself.
Exactly.
I challenge you. Yeah.
Well, and what's funny is that a lot of people who actually do, who are hunters, not big game hunters, trophy hunters, but are not
sustenance hunting. Yeah.
Sustenance hunting. People do that and they enjoy it because it's returning to where we used to come from. We are now, and gardening is the same way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because we are now the ones who are in charge of creating our food. We hunted the animal. We, gutted them and made the steaks, and we tried to save as much as we could because we don't want to waste anything. Yeah. And the same with gardening. You plant the seeds and you water them, and you get your hands in the earth. And then at the end of the day, exactly where you got that food. You are being self-sufficient. But then at the same time, that might be like, you might have two people living in the boondocks. One can hunt, one's gathering and they can be sustained. But what happens if, their house, there's a tree falls on their house? Where's the community that would help them? Like, so, or how is their mental health being so isolated? So, having that communal support is, humans are very resourceful, and a human can learn how to do everything by themselves, but we're not taking into account our mental health and of our need for socialization.
Where you could almost go Buddhist for a moment and meditate on the interconnectedness of everything.
Oh yeah.
You can't extract yourself out of a matrix or matrices that right. Iterative. What do they call it? Fractal, things. No, 0.000 some percent of our population who are Western do that, and they're out in Montana somewhere, and they're doing their thing, but still they are somewhat still tethered to systems that are deeply interdependent.
It's just to other people who are doing the same thing.
Right. Right.
You gotta give yourself support.
Yeah, and I think we tend to love to go binary in the West. It's either you're that individualist, or you're in this sort of hive mind collectivist thing, and there could be a lot of pitfalls to that, or the cost of that could be a little high, as it could also in hyper individualism. But let's think of that. Let's get rid of the law of excluded middle or whatever, and think about this zone, this habitable zone, perhaps of where we borrow from each. And for me, my soapbox moment with individualism is that the strongest argument for individualism is that your emotional hygiene and your all your valences are lined up and you're pro-social. You have a tendency to be empathetic to others in a way that is then reciprocal, that you can use that empathy to you feel an impetus to be a part of something. So that to me is what individualism would be in an ideal world for me, is that it's just that preparing yourself to be part of a community so that you are an individual, but you are nonetheless part of a system of small culture or larger culture. So
you are self-actualized.
Like right? You were saying.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And so, but it's kind of, you have to have the community in order to become self-actualized. You need to be self-actualized in order to be a productive, part of the community. It's so interconnected. Like, it's very Buddhist. It's all very, very Buddhist.
That's why his stuff sticks around, because it speaks to some very basic truths. Like I kind of, sometimes I scoff at Buddhism, like the Four Noble Truths. Well, it's very deontological. I get it, blah, blah. But then you have this reverence for it because these are core principles that can really give you, and the Eightfold Path and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of wisdom to that. And so it deserves to be pulled off the shelf once in a while and used, like we're doing in this conversation, as for instances. And speaking of going back to the mimesis thing, that the interdependence or the interconnectedness of us, and however you want to scale that, it could be tribal, it could be called, in the West, I guess your suburbs or wherever you exist, and that your community, your communitas, that you're connected, that there are noble truths to that you see yourself in the others, and again, that's the mimesis, where we and a good example of that is, and if you want to talk about evolution, and Dawkins, he popularized the meme, which is everywhere on the internet now. You have these tacky little things that people post up, but the meme is a very powerful thought model, and that it's a viral thought. So you'll listen to conversations, especially on social media, and everybody's using certain words. They'll say "it is what it is" or "literally." Everybody's using "literally" like a million times now. So, but that's to me shows that we are mimetic people, and that we because of our social nature, it's kind of a currency, or some social cash that we use to feel part of a connection or whatever. So that was a weird tangent, but just to to reinforce this idea that that individualism is okay, but that we're part of a social system,
right?
Whether we like it or not.
It's like individualism has its benefits, just like the modern world has its benefits,
right?
But unless you are incorporating the things that got you to this individual place where you're successful, unless you have reverence for how you got there, or unless you're actually aware that these things are actually what helped you get there. And then you need to, you can't just leave those behind. You have to, teach other people what happened for you and how you got here. And so other people can, it's like a self-actualized person, someone who's an individual who can really insert themselves into a social group. Those are the elders, those are the people who need to be teaching. And that requires more, an individual isn't necessarily going to think of all the people who are going to come behind them. If you're so individually minded, but you want to, it's like, lowering your, you climb the ladder, and then like you put a hand down to help pull other people up. And so it's individualism, but it's also altruism, and having to realize that the knowledge that you have, you can't hoard it, or the money that you have, you can't hoard it. There needs to be some sort of way to share up and down. I don't know. This is getting very but actually this is great, because I'm, like I said, I'm working on the second book now, and there's all these things that are kind of coming up, that it's really this conversation's really helping me figure out some things I want to put in the book. So I'm appreciative of it.
Well, these are just the things I think of because your book, your book impressed upon me, and I'm onboarding a new perspective, or my frame is shifting a little bit, and so credit to you and your writing partner on that, because I mean that's how I love to live my life, is to never rigidly hold on to anything, and in that same and you wrote a great book, so and to the audience, again, contact. But one thing I wanted to ask you, because this book does focus on evolution in the sort of hard Darwinian sense, but what you had mentioned in the book that we can extract from the book is sort of a pet thesis of mine when it comes to evolution, is that when you get a higher order intelligence creature, not that I'm super intelligent, but it's an example, us as humans, right. And we abstract ourselves out of the normal flow of selective pressure and all the things that we talk about in that model. First of all, I have to be careful saying this because we are still subject to those pressures, but again, we've extracted ourselves out to a certain degree. But then, nonetheless, we find us at this next level of a social evolution, or cultural evolution, or psychological evolution, if we want to get personal, or collectively psychical evolution. That offers a whole nother domain of pressures and adaptive strategies and things like that. But I almost wonder at the base level again of just this sort of raw, selective pressure and passing, favorable information on in our genes. Have we become maladaptive in that sense, that we are not quite sure how to manage this abstracted level of metacognitive, self-reflective selves that we are, and that seems to be one of the pillars of our modern series of crises, meta-crises that we find ourselves in, is that we have to reconcile that so I would say that plants and very simple creatures definitely follow those rules, that if an environmental pressure trigger, something happens, you're gone, and this little population might be resistant to whatever. But then when you're up at this other abstracted level, that's a lot more difficult. Nature itself can't do that. It's where we are sort of the chess players in that kind of. So I'll hand that back to you and see what you want to.
Yeah, I mean, the question is like, are we still evolving? Or has cultural evolution and our intelligence, are we bypassed actual genetic evolution? Because we we can use technology to survive, even if we don't, we're sick, or, you know what I mean? There's no natural selection, survival of the fittest, which does not mean what most people think it means. Fitness in an evolutionary sense means that you survive to reproductive age and you have offspring. And so your genes, the more offspring you have, the more fitness you have. But if our survival isn't dependent on our body's ability, to do something, I feel like for most modern people, like, our day-to-day lives are not about survival, right? We don't have to worry about, and these are the lucky people. I'm sure there are people who do worry about where their next meal is going to come from. I mean, there's tons of people like that. But it's not like, how it used to be, where we have this survival, like it's life or death, literally. And I'm using literally the right way there.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I had to put that jig in.
It's funny.
I listen to podcasts and people are like, I literally walked in the room and saw a glass of water. And I'm like, that's a superlative. It's not a comparative analysis of a metaphor or an allegory. It's like,
right.
There's a figure of speech, and then there's trust me, I do it too, but I just think it's funny though. If you listen, everybody is saying literally, like every third sentence now.
Exactly.
That speaks to what Dawkins talked about with the meme. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
It's the meme
yeah.
at work, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, no judgment.
So once we got to the point where we can make these changes culturally, and we didn't have to make these changes genetically, are we still evolving genetically? But I like what you said, because all of these changes have occurred so fast, our bodies even haven't had time to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And whether, like we said before, are our bodies even evolving to meet some of these challenges, or is it something that we're going to have to use our intelligence to adapt to? And we need to evolve how we think about things,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't necessarily involve hard Darwinian evolutionary natural selection.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a lot more, you know, I think, like you said, some people like things to be binary. Like with natural selection, either an adaptation worked or it didn't, and it got passed on, right? And so now we're at this point where we're not adapting genetically, but we're adapting psychologically, or in our behaviors and what we're thinking. That's so not black and white. It gets so complicated that we might not even know until like maybe another 10,000 years from now, what changes are we actually making to address some of these challenges. And I don't necessarily think we have survival pressures now, but we do have thriving pressures. We have we have health pressures. We have mental health pressures, physical health pressures, social health pressures, that are all going to have to be addressed, not by genetic evolution. We're all going to have to address these things with our creativity and intelligence. And that includes, you know, that requires people to be more like you, have an open mind. You're not clinging to something so hard that you're not going to be able to change your frame when some new information comes along. Right. Which I think is a wonderful way to go through life. You know, it's being open to other opinions and being open to having your opinion changed. Is something that I think they need to teach in school. Because I think right now people hang on so fast, so hard, that there's conflict, and we don't know how to deal with the conflict either. So, you know, there's just a different approach to life and to people who think differently than you and people who believe different things than you. There's so much there that we need to change, but it's going to have to come from our intelligence and creativity.
Yeah.
Our culture.
Because and I think if we don't self-correct in that regard, that there is, this gets weird again, but this kind of inductive downward pressure from the metacognitive aspect of ourselves, the higher order psychological selves, are putting a pressure back down into a genetic level. So diseases like you studied autoimmune conditions, and you point out in your book quite clearly that the hunter-gatherers had their, you know, physical ailments and things like that. But boy, we've just onboarded so many new stress-oriented diseases, and, you know, the cancers and diabetes and things like this that have, you know, and this is all quite well argued and laid out in your book. But I think that's an inductive pressure from this abstracted thing that we're talking about here that has some adaptive challenges. And like you just said a minute ago, we have choices. We have, you know, forks in the road that we have to keep our best interest in mind collectively, again, you know, as a species. What a responsibility to look at it that way too. That now that we've sort of broken out of the shackles of standard, you know, pressures for simpler, and I hate to say that, you know, but creatures that are more subject to that, that we have taken on this burden of managing ourselves now, you know, that we are aware that we are selves. Yeah.
Right. So I think, you know, one of the issues is that a lot of the things that ail us, or, you know, come after reproduction. You know, when we're in our 20s, these are our height of our reproductive years. We have not started feeling the effects of our lifestyle. And so I think that's why there's not genetic pressure, because But you're right, though, because people are suffering from things earlier and earlier and earlier. if people start suffering from these diseases of modernity, in their teens before their reproductive years, and then aren't as successfully reproductive, that might be some sort of selection pressure. So that's where I can see the hard Darwinian evolutionary natural selection playing out. If these, there's obesity in young children and depression and anxiety and things like that may affect their fitness in an evolutionary sense in terms of being able to pass their genes on. And so there very well might be, like at this exact moment, probably not, but maybe in 50 years, there is going to be genetically selected.
Yeah. It'll start showing up in our,
but it'll still
blueprints.
take a long time
Yeah.
to show it. We won't even know in our lifetimes if it's even happening. This is something that people are going to have to look back thousands of years from now and figure out if that was really happening or not.
Yeah. Yeah. So we then become, in a way, our own selective pressures or our own environmental stressors. Yeah. We become that ourselves. That's something that's onboarded, I guess, with that abstraction. Yeah. Now here's okay. Well, while you're sorry. Well, while you're pondering that, I think of the craziest things. And so one thing you stated in the book, and you did it, for instance, when it comes to primates like us, that there was an example of a Malagasy primate that had never encountered snakes, a lemur or something. I can't remember. But there was something, and humans to chimps to whatever that are in the ecosystem with snakes or serpents, that we have this innate onboard response. You could call it the instinct. And so I thought, it's easy to understand and map human memory in the living system, but it's a little more murky to try to understand how memory might be encoded and inherited. But one thing I was thinking about broadly in your book, using the instance of the aversion or revulsion from the presence of a snake, is embedded in us. Whether it's genetically, I don't know what the mechanism is, but the idea that part of us in modernity dealing again with all a lot of people call it the meta crisis or the meaning crisis or whatever it is, the malaise that we feel in this modern era, that is food, that is disrupted sleep schedules and all these things, is also that sort of underlying implicit recollection of that pre-pastoral, pre-agriculture. This is very abstract, very vague, but just that if we have that instinct to have an aversion to snakes or sudden predator movements and things like that we still have in our system right now, that we didn't learn. It's a priori, it's something that's just that once it happens, then we respond. But I was wondering if that's not hidden somewhere in the background, as part of our, where we are, with whatever we're dealing with. Again, maybe a cultural malaise or a species malaise that we spent, like you said, 90-something% of our time being these relatively content. And you use the word eudaimonia a few times in the book too, which I absolutely adore, that word has been used, because I think we are more hedonic than eudaimonic anymore. But anyway, I'm running down different paths. The idea, and we don't have to talk about this, but it's just the idea that if we have these onboarded instinctual apparatus, faculties, whatever it is, I almost wonder if there isn't some ghost in our lineage that's just like, do you remember when we were more in tune with nature, more communal, and now that we are in a post-industrial metamodern society, that for a lot of us that are in suburban and urban environments, that maybe that's there in the background. I don't know, and if that just adds to our malaise.
I think you're right. I think you're onto something, because I do think that our bodies are telling us things. We're just not listening, because we don't live in the present moment. We are not attuned to our bodies, and the signals our bodies do get or do give us that we're like, oh, I'm tired. Oh, I shouldn't eat that. There's so many other things. There's so much noise that just overrides those instinctual kind of things that you were talking about. Like our bodies evolved to tell us when we're tired. Mm-hmm. But if we don't go to sleep when we feel tired, we're overriding our bodies. And then, you know what I mean? We're not paying attention to our actual body's needs because we're so caught up in that current of this fast-paced world. And so a lot of these things that need to change, it needs to start with slowing down. Mm-hmm. And actually relearning or reattuning yourself to the present moment and what moment to moment, what your body needs. Are you really hungry or are you really stressed out? And if you're really stressed out, maybe you're not hungry. Maybe you just need to take a break, or maybe you need to go for a walk, or maybe you need to call someone and talk. Being able to slow down enough and not just put Band-Aids on symptoms or ignore, sometimes our bodies are screaming at us, but we're like, I have to work 5 more hours. I can't go to bed right now. That's just not what our ancestors ever did. Their bodies were their mechanism for survival. They didn't have anything else except their own bodies and the people around them and limited technology to survive. So our bodies do not have to be fit to survive, but our bodies have to be fit to thrive.
Yeah.
And eudaimonia is a state of flourishing. It's not necessarily being happy all the time, but it's being able to flourish and being able to return to equilibrium, or homeostasis when you get thrown off, because life's going to throw you off. You're not going to live in this homeostatic, I'm happy all the time.
Right.
But because life throws you curveballs, everybody has things get thrown at them. But the question is, are you healthy enough and are you able to thrive enough to bring yourself back to baseline after you get thrown off? And that is the kind of the essence of being able to thrive and flourish. Because if you get, you're growing and you're flourishing and then you get thrown off, but you never return, now you're over here going on a totally different path. And then you get thrown off again and you're never back to where you needed to be to start to make this flourishing path a reality.
Yeah. And there's a quote in your book I want to read, and it said that fits perfectly with what you just said. And it said, instead of thinking bigger, better, more, think smaller, less, more meaningful. I wanted to read it, so I didn't mess it up. But I pulled that quote out of your book, and that fits exactly to what you were saying. And I love the cybernetic metaphor because getting into that homeostatic, it could be a broader space. And like you said, that the perturbances that occur, you'll find the point attractor, the attractor state because this is cybernetics, you want that attractor state of equilibrium, but then grant yourself that latitude to say, well, it's not always going to be roses. And that's one of the hard things to learn about eudaimonia is that, as you said, it's not about happiness all the time. Happiness arises and then it goes away, and you don't. And that's where we fall into, I think, the trap of the hedonistic pursuit of happiness. So that it mirrors that and it parallels that to some extent, and then we think, oh, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, which of course is a lot more of this versus maybe something like this. But I love that like you said, we're in that steady state, and that whatever comes along, that you can find that point attractor again and keep yourself in that homeostasis.
Because, well, let me say this first, then I'll talk about my thinking. So our bodies evolved to return to homeostasis, right?
Okay.
There are mechanisms in our bodies. And so this totally ties back to my PhD thesis.
Okay.
Because you said, how is this going to tie back? And this is blowing my mind because it totally ties back to my PhD thesis.
Okay.
So the reason why there were these 2 different signals to either the macrophage is going to proliferate or the macrophage is going to die is so we could return to equilibrium. Because after an infection is over, you don't want these macrophages to keep going.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They need to be gotten rid of. And so our immune system has a built-in evolutionary, way through these signaling molecules and what's going on inside the cell, the context in which the cell's receiving this signal, to decide and make the right decision. So now the immune reaction is over, these macrophages need to die. They
Yeah.
need to be gotten rid of, so they're not taking up resources, and so you're returning to equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
And so my thesis was totally talking about that inherent ability of our bodies to return to equilibrium if we
Mm-hmm.
let them
Mm-hmm.
do their thing, and if we provide the resources that our bodies need to return to equilibrium,
Mm-hmm.
which means allowing ourselves to rest, eating good food, surrounding yourself with people who will take care of you if you need it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that is really crazy, because I was like, I don't think what I'm doing now kind of goes back to how my scientific training, but it actually really does.
Oh, sure, sure. And I'm not clever enough to have done that intentionally, but I'm glad you put the connection together, because I think, and this is another weird thought of Justin, but the idea of a kind of invariance across scales, so that inside our bodies we have that going on, but it's a good metaphor for when we do find in a smaller social level, a region, and something happens, a natural disaster or something, and we seek that steady state to return.
Mm-hmm.
We rebuild, we check in on each other, we make sure we have food and water if we're an egalitarian society. And so again, within the body, within the individual, and then within a society, doesn't matter how big the society is. Well, maybe it does, but that process can be found to repeat itself iteratively. So
yeah, so
that's kind of stretching it a little bit.
Well, no, it happens on the cellular level, but it also happens on the
It can happen at a
level.
cultural level, yeah.
But I think what's going on now is our culture is moving so fast. Like, what's equilibrium anymore?
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like we've gone way past where there's an equilibrium and a slow creep, so we can, culture changes, everything changes, but
Right.
But rather than being able to get to a new equilibrium, we're just in flux. Oh, hi, buddy.
You have a friend joining the interview.
Yes. Yeah.
I have my cat on my lap, so we've got our furry buddies here.
Look how cute
My cat jumped
is.
on me early. Yeah, so it's pet time. What a cute puppy, though. Oh, that's cute.
He just has to check in every once in a while. So.
That's fine. Yeah, like I said, my cat's chilling with me. She does that sometimes when we do interviews. So
that's funny.
But yeah, I mean, the idea of recognizing the repeatability of a pattern, and self-correcting patterns, because again, to get weird, prior to life at that singularity or that threshold, but where we're back to just simple self-organizing systems, that they all pretty much, the cosmological constants and what is it? What am I trying to think of? Just in physics itself, that there are patterns and regularities, and we have the weak and strong force, all these things that sort of keep everything in check in our what we understand of physics. So there's not a lot of distinction, I don't think, between a living system and a self-organizing system at that crude level of seeking, like the sun coalesces into itself, and planets coalesce into these rocky things, and solar systems coalesce into whatever gravity is doing there, and galaxies, so it's like this little dance so we could go cosmically with it or universally with this, and then we can go down to cells, like you said, with macrophages on, off, what do I do?
We can go even smaller and think of quantum physics.
Yeah.
Well, is this,
Yeah, probabilistic scenarios, and what is the system itself doing? I don't know enough about quantum, but yeah, it's coalescence, and it is seeking a steady state or whatever it is that it's doing. So we're part of that, and that's just another humiliating practice, I guess. And I say humiliating as in grounding, like because humilus. It's a grounding practice to help us realize we are, to get Buddhist for a second, we're embedded in a system. And one thing the Buddhists talk about is the dukkha, that when you there is an aberration out of order, and this is me saying this, it's not the doctrine, but that you feel the stress of being in disharmony or discordant with what would otherwise be that steady state, that equilibrium, again, to go to cybernetics. So if we listen to those little things, and maybe we'll get to a point culturally where or microcultures can do that, and then again through mimesis and through the meme, that that becomes a social virus oh, look what those people are doing. They're not killing each other. What are they doing? Oh my gosh, they're sharing. What? Yeah. Woo.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's,
no,
yeah,
but I'm
let's
not
have sharing go viral. Wow.
Right. And I'm not seeking utopia. I want there to be problems and I want there to be issues, but it's like we're really good at problems and issues and
Right.
just recognizing the patterns and regularities of nature and just saying, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, we can learn from that. Yeah.
I am seeing that though. It is, I mean, I've been on a lot of health and wellness podcasts, and it's happening. More and more people are turning to like more functional medicine. Mm-hmm. And there are these little pockets of people who are doing it differently. And like we're talking about earlier, it's just a matter of the people who are finally getting to the point where they just can't do it this way anymore. There has to be another way. There are places they can turn to that are already established, little pockets that will just get bigger and bigger. So. Yeah.
And one huge dream of mine is that if there were further reformations in the wisdom traditions, both here in the West with Abrahamic systems, as well as taking the best of what the so-called Eastern systems are, which actually, again, they address this kind of thing, like Taoism and some of the Advaita Vedanta teachings and things like they try to point out these things that there is continuum and continuity and congruence and coherence.
I would add all the indigenous systems to that.
Yes,
totally,
yes,
because
absolutely.
I think that's some of the Abrahamic and Eastern traditions and things like that you were talking about are a reflection of that in a more modern world. But if we're really going to get back to basics, looking to the indigenous systems, that's an important thing that we need to do.
And I think part of a broader reformation is to include and to bring in repeatability in those ideas in the Aboriginal wisdom traditions and things like that. By Aboriginal, I mean just basically that. Between the tropics, the Cancer and Capricorn, where our birthplace, where we more or less came from and settled in the various diaspora periods. So yeah, I totally agree that there's wisdom to be extracted from that and used effectively. Because again, going back to that anarcho-primitivism thing, if you study tribes, and it's not that, like you said, just like hunter-gatherer, we're not going back to the tribal living like they do in New Guinea or in the Amazon forest or in the sub-Saharan region, but that what they're doing, we could learn from them, both in their oral traditions, but just in their behavior and you point that out in your book. You mention a number of different what we would so rudely call or so hubristically call primitive cultures, but I think they're very sophisticated.
They are. They had it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a thought. Oh, it's gone now.
Oh no.
That's all right. Maybe it'll come back.
Another interview, perhaps.
No,
we'll bring you back.
One of those like whoa, and then my dog distracted me. So.
Oh no. Okay, it'll come back in. It'll come back in. Well, we're getting close to that time. We were joking before that we want to start. Let's get on our first descent, not final descent. But what I'd like to do is ask you to use airplane metaphors. What would you like to talk about for the next 10, 15 minutes before you definitely have a hard stop? What haven't we addressed about the book or the forthcoming volumes that you want to get into the minds of the audience, that we can then end the show, and when other books come out, we can have you back for more discussion.
Yeah. I think we covered so much. I think I maybe get it back to more less theoretical, like this high mind. I mean, it's been really, really fun, but to bring it back into more like day-to-day practical things. And people are always like, well, how are people going to start? And I think to kind of start on the path that we are talking about and getting back on track and being more in tune with our inner hunter-gatherers, it's going to take education. People have to be willing to open and let new information in. Well, I gotta let my dog out. I'm so sorry. What?
Oh, no problem.
Can you hear
I can hit pause for a
second. The door. Okay.
No,
He's scratching
I'll
at the
hit
door.
pause for a second and you come back.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm so
we're going to hit
sorry.
pause right now.
Thanks. Yeah, so bring it back to tangible things, and it is learning how we got to where we are.
Okay.
People who are like, well, there's, we don't need to learn history because it already happened, but you have to learn history, where we came from, how we got here, to
Right.
understand how to change it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you can change something because someone tells you to, or you can understand the reasons why you need to change something and then have more of an internal impetus to change, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So learning about how we used to live, learning about evolution, people need to, well, first of all, I think people need to realize that evolution, isn't just a theory anymore. There's so much scientific evidence. It's one of the best supported theories of all time. And to bring, evolution isn't something that you're just going to bring and learn in your 9th grade science, and then you're never going to think about it again.
Mm-hmm.
Because understanding evolution, understanding our history, people need to know how evolution is playing out in today's lives, in our lives today, whether or not we're evolving or not. The concepts that we talk about in the book and the concepts that you and I have talked about this mismatch, learning how we evolved is critical into closing that gap of mismatch. So it's really fun to think about all of these really high level things and what it means, but really the day-to-day, one thing at a time, slow crawl to improving your life is, it's tangible, and it starts with learning, and then not being so overwhelmed with all the things that you're not doing. I mean, when I was writing this book, there was a period where I was really depressed because I wasn't doing a lot of that stuff. And it was overwhelming. It was like, oh my gosh, where do I even start? And so I just took one or two things and started that. And then once those two things became habit, and I was feeling better, then it became easier to make more changes. And then as I was feeling better with those other changes, it's not something that you can just totally turn on all at once.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to be better. It's a day-to-day practice, very much like Buddhism, mindfulness, meditation. It's a day-to-day practice. You kind of have to choose to do something differently every day. You have to choose to maybe not do the things in the mainstream way, which is hard, but going back to community, finding people who want to make these changes with you, finding people who will support you in these changes, that is really critical.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And that's outlined in your book too, for the audience, that, this is available, when you read the book, that these ideas that you're addressing now, like, how do I implement this? How do I walk this path? And I think you nailed it. It's not instant gratification. It's more on the eudaimonic side of things than the hedonic side of things. Like, you're not going to get dopamine hits from abstaining from sugar, which we're all, I eat sugar, and I'm working on it. I'm working on it. But and learning to appreciate simplicity, and whether that's your diet or whether it's your social patterns, or as you pointed out in the book, this insatiable appetite for consuming material things or possessing material things. It's a wonderful distraction, but it's not our history. It's a very recent phenomena, and so. And it's not,
it's not easy. It's actually hard at times, but I think our lives have gotten way too comfortable because we don't know how to do hard things. We've forgotten how to do hard things. When we were evolving, when we were hunter-gatherers, even life 200 years ago, life was hard. We encountered hard things that we had to overcome. And we live in a world of comfort, which is wonderful, but we don't have that muscle to make ourselves do hard things anymore. There are people who do, but I think just it's a general kind of overarching thing that comfortability and convenience has made us resistant to changing, because doing something differently is hard.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And going back to my little instinct tangent that I was on, I think there is this drive in us historically, that this other kind of kinetic energy coming at us from our backs historically, generation, of scarcity, of the famine periods, the shadowy things that we had to encounter, as far as, keeping ourselves going or keeping the tribe or the family going. And I think that's also embedded there, and that's what might drive that impulse or that that desire to fortify ourselves with objects or foods, or so that understanding that and just holding that in a kind of a thinking space or a thought space, that you can say, oh, this is why I'm partially what I'm feeling here, is that maybe there's this drive in me, this innate thing that says collect, save, because of scarcity. And that's why we store fat. It's like, it's the same kind of thinking. Our body's like, okay, good, sugar's here, or fatty things are here. Let's store up. So,
but having that sort of self-reflection is going to help you, is slowing down, is learning how to dissect things that are going on inside your body or in your mind. That actually will help, it's the self-actualization. It's gonna, it's gonna get you to that awareness. If you have this self-awareness of your body, of your, your likes and dislikes, of, your personality, your emotional state. If you have all these awarenesses, then you can, when one of them's off, and you can like track down and, investigate and figure out, how do I get back on track?
Yeah.
Not just mindlessly numbing it away.
And I think you said something incredibly important a moment ago, that this is not a individual effort. This is an effort that can, if you can bring in people who have the same goals in mind, or are working on a project, if you want to call it that, that having that kind of support. There's a guy that I follow, and he says, we don't learn monologically, we learn dialogically, that we can sit and read something, but then to really totally take that in and have a great apprehension of that is to be in dialogue with someone and share ideas. And so I think that also radiates out into this idea of support, that you can't do support monotypically or whatever. You have to have a community there, that it could be family, it could be friends, could be online. We have, that's one nice thing about what we have available to us in social media, is you can join these groups that are supportive in that sense. So there's, I think,
it's funny, because it wasn't until I wrote the book and, talked about it with people, but it wasn't until I started doing podcasts with people and had discussions like you and I have had, that a lot of the ideas and a lot of the concepts have really crystallized for me. So, some of these realizations, might not have come. Maybe they came like 6 months ago, and, the book was published. It's because a lot of these ideas are like becoming crystallized because of the dialogues I've had, because of the questions people have asked me, because of the things that people have asked me to think about in a different way, that have really, so I'm finding support just being on podcasts. I'm finding support, not only of the work, but of my own, my own desires to get back on track and to figure out how to be in equilibrium and homeostasis and feel better and have that eudaimonia. So yeah, just writing the book and reading the book hasn't done it for me, but like being in conversation has made it so much easier and so much clearer. Like the path is just so much clearer too.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad, because that's a great case in point or example of this process that we all have accessible to us. If we, have people around us, some guy sitting in an igloo somewhere by themselves, maybe not so much, but, a lot of us have social resources and cash, and that's available, and take advantage of it.
It's available at our fingertips. And yeah. You use our interconnectedness and social media for good. Yeah,
absolutely. No more kitty cat memes for me. I have to get out and I don't post too many.
Kitty cat
They're
memes
cute, right? That's the only reason I go to Facebook anymore. It's just to see the cat.
Get caught. All the animal videos, I totally get caught. I'm like, oh my gosh.
I get the shelters. I get the no-kill shelters, and so they that and I love botany and horticulture, so I get some plants and stuff. But yeah, I get all these cute little dogs and cats in the shelters, and I'm like, and I hit the hearts. I'm a sucker for that. But anyway, but yeah.
Too. They know our minds. They know.
They know how to hijack us, right?
So good.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's been a wonderful conversation, and I hope it was good for you to
it's been really
share
fun.
your ideas and thoughts. Good. To the audience, I appreciate you all staying here for this conversation, being here for this conversation. I say stay here because the people that stay to the end, you're my heroes. Because there's so much richness, and
hopefully they follow it all along and aren't like, oh
I
my
hope
gosh.
so. Yeah, in the ADD TikTok world, these long form conversations can be a challenge, but I get drawn in when I listen. I just, oh man, I'm good. I hope the longer the better for me, because anyway. But yeah, it's been wonderful having you. I really enjoyed the book. I appreciate that coming into my life and giving me some things to think about. And I know your next volumes are going to be amazing, because that's actually where the jazz is for me, is the psychosocial, psychocultural, all that kind of stuff. And
there's pressure now.
Well, no.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
It's going to be there anyway,
Yeah.
It's
Don't let me be a source for that though. But no, I'm really looking forward to that, because this is yet another mode or method or means that will be available in the world, and that people can. I think there's a real famine for these kind of ideas and thinking. I really do. Or the famine may be too harsh of a word, but there's a hunger out there for this. And you see it. People gravitate to these viral concepts of self-improvement or discovery or whatever it is. And so if that's carefully prescribed and well thought out, that can have such an amazing impact on human lives. So thank you to you and your writing partner for that, doing that.
Thank you so much for showing interest and having me on your show. And it was wonderful to meet you.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. I will say goodbye to you after we stop record, but to the YouTube audience, you guys take care, and we'll see you in the next episode. So thank you for being here as well. All right. So let me stop recording here.